Welcome back to Senior Savvy Cannabis. I'm Katherine Goldberg. Today, we're joined by Joseph Haggard of Emerald Spirit Botanicals. Joseph, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us. I've been wanting to have this conversation since I learned about your Pink Boost Goddess strain. But before we get into why THCV is fabulous, can you tell us about your cannabis philosophy? What you do, how you approach the plant, why you wake up every morning? How do you think about this?
Well, thanks, Catherine, and hello, everyone. Um, Really, our whole cannabis philosophy comes from the teachings of my mother and a lot of the work that she has done. She originally was an herbalist and then sort of came to cannabis because cannabis is such a powerful healing plant. Um, and she saw it, through this lens of essentially that plants are evolving ahead of us. They provide air that we breathe, they provide food that nourishes us, they provide medicine that heals us. And she also recognizes that there's this quality of life and wisdom that lives within the plant kingdom. And so she took that philosophy and applied it to cultivating her own herbs, one of them being cannabis. And just under 20 years ago, really started breeding for different cannabinoid ratios within the plant. And this sort of began, it was kind of funny. This was before we were really able to identify the different chemical compounds in the plant. It was more of just like an intuitive sort of feeling from the heart and then experiencing the flower after we grew it. And we noticed that, certain batches of cannabis would get you strongly stoned. Some of them would get you more uplifted and going, and some of them wouldn't really get you high at all. And so we weren't really sure, what this was, but we came to find shortly thereafter that she had sort of almost intuitively been breeding for CBD through some of her early work with cannabis. And that was the strains. She didn't know why some of this stuff didn't really get us high, but she really liked it. And she's like, there's something else here that this plant has to offer. And it's different than the classic high THC stone that most breeders and patients are chasing. It was kind of an accidental stumble upon that she really found this. But then once she realized what it was that she was working with, she dove headfirst into it. And she started breeding for initially, she started breeding for high CBD. And then through some of her plant meditations that she does, as an herbalist and as a healer, a lot of that work is getting to know the plant, understanding the gifts that the plant has to offer, sitting with the plant in silence and sort of asking for guidance or, wisdom to come through your experience with the plant. And when she was sitting with some of her high CBD, one of the messages that came was, high THC is important, high CBD is important, but really this plant is about balance and is about harmony, and bringing these two compounds together would be a worthwhile endeavor. And so she was sort of guided by the plants to start breeding for cannabis genetics that were expressing equal parts THC and CBD. And this was right as testing was coming online. So we were able to, we could quantifiably identify high THC strains, we could identify high CBD strains. It was becoming more readily available to some of the breeders here in Northern California. And so that allowed her to start looking for ratios of THC to CBD within her seed lines. And so she spent about 10 years really breeding from that perspective of looking for balanced ratios of THC to CBD. And then, through that journey, we started to learn about the endocannabinoid system, which is the system within our body that is naturally producing endogenous cannabinoids, and that pairs nicely with the phytocannabinoids that the cannabis plant produces. And as research continues to unfold about the endocannabinoid system, we are learning that essentially that system is responsible for maintaining balance in the body. And so if we are going to be supplementing that system with phytocannabinoids from the cannabis plant, we should probably have some medicinal compounds in our little toolkit that have balanced ratios of these cannabinoids. And we believe that that's largely missing from the cannabis seed pool. And so we've now dedicated the last 15 plus years, almost 20 years, to breeding cannabis genetics that have balanced ratios of THC, CBD, and then now we've started to explore some of the other minor cannabinoids.
I love it. I love it. There's a trend I've noticed. I've talked to a couple growers up in Northern California. A lot of people learned how to grow from their moms. Have you
Yeah,
have, have you picked up on that too, or is that just coincidental?
no, I mean that kind of comes with the territory. So, just like a short history in Northern
Please.
California. A lot of this area was being logged. And the logging companies, they come in and they harvest the wood. And naturally, when a forest gets cut down, you end up with a lot of erosion. You end up with a lot of damage to the topsoil. And it created this unique opportunity for what's now considered the back to the land movement, where people from, around California and around the world were able to come to Northern California and they could purchase land relatively cheap to create their own homesteads. And these were people that were dedicated to restoring the land, helping the soil. And it was sort of this perfect storm where there was a lot of damaged soil from the logging. The topsoil had been kind of washed away. And so these multi-generational homesteads essentially sprouted up as a result of people purchasing land from the logging companies, whether that be 20 acres, 50 acres, 100 acres, whatever, each family has a different story. But then they were able to raise children, they were able to get gardens set up, and then, now come to this day, it's like, some of those, in my case, it was my parents. For some people, it was their grandparents. But it goes back a few generations. So, some of the families that are still here in Northern California today, growing food, growing cannabis, a lot of, they share a common thread of, that sort of a story. So that's
That's
probably why you've
special.
met a few like multi-generational farmers that share that same line.
I love it. Um, I love having it be a family affair of wisdom and compassion and patience and everything that comes with it. Are there any stories that kind of just stick out in your mind about people who tried some of your mom's strains, these balance strains, and maybe got their life back together? Like maybe they were suffering in some profound way? Or is there any, I'm sure we all hear stories like this because cannabis is amazing, but is there anything that just sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, man, there's so many stories really. People have had their lives changed by cannabis in general, but I think something really special happens when you start to bring balanced ratios together. I think one story that sticks with me, and this was with Pink Buscatus, was there was individual, he also lived up here and was, kind of he was in a rough stretch. And he had heard about THCV and some of the work we were doing, and THCV and Pink Buscatus contains THCV. THCV has been shown to help elevate mood, to help regulate blood sugar, to help reduce cravings in the munchies, to be more energizing. And, he was kind of suffering from some depression. He was a little overweight. He didn't necessarily feel very motivated. And, it was kind of in the doldrums, so to speak. And reached out to us, got some of the Pink Boost Goddess, and did a small little study with himself just to measure the impacts. He also made a couple other lifestyle changes, changes around diet, making an effort to exercise, which are all essential, components to this. It's not just the cannabis plant. But what he saw over a few months was by using one, he may have been overdosing on THC, just smoking lots, taking in too much THC, which can be a sedative. And so that could, have something to do with motivation. But by having THCV in it, it helped. What he described was it helped him to rediscover the sensation of feeling full again. He was eating a lot. And what I believe was kind of the root cause of it was, the late night munchie attack, which every stoner knows. But if you eat a lot of food at night and then you fall asleep on a full stomach, you have trouble sleeping because you should not be sleeping on a full stomach. And then if you have trouble sleeping, the next morning you wake up, you're kind of tired. If you're kind of tired, it's hard to be motivated. It's hard to get things done. And then, you can fall into this downward spiral. What he noticed is by using the pink boost goddess, he started to have the sensation of feeling full, which reduced his late night munchies. He said for the first time that he could remember, he actually was pushing plates of food away from him because he felt satisfied with the amount of food that he had eaten. Whereas normally he was like, food is in front of me, I could just eat and eat and eat. By limiting the amount of food he was eating at night, he was then falling asleep, sleeping well, waking up rejuvenated, feeling more inspired to get things done throughout the day, being more active in his body. This then changed his psychological state. He felt more motivated, he felt more encouraged, he felt more upbeat. And he gave a large amount of that credit to shifting his cannabis consumption, the way that he was doing it. I think that's one example. Another example with some of our THCV is I just had a patient last week send me an email saying that they're confident that our THCV medicine is working better than their GLP-1 medication, which is like kind of insane to hear that from somebody. Haven't done any studies with that, so that's just a one of one anecdotal. Actually, it's more than one of one, but it was just another person that came in saying like, hey, I've been on some of these GLP-1s for weight loss and for regulating my appetite. And there's a lot of side effects that come along with it. And I've had a couple people now, but somebody just last week brought it up again, that this THCV medicine it's more effective. They're finding similar results. It's helping with their blood glucose levels. It's reducing their overall cravings, and they're not having the negative side effects that some of these other medications can bring. So I think, all of those stories sort of share a theme, that it's really helping us change our relationship to our food and change the relationship to how we consume. And when we look at our culture right now, we are programmed to overconsume. And if we can bring that back into check, or bring that back into balance, which is what the endocannabinoid system does, then we can feel better about our lives and we can, go on to do better things in our day. So I think, it always comes back to balance, but you can take it into these different realms of health, and see these miracles happening. But then when you bring it back to the center, you find like, oh, this is just, the body is finding a way to regulate itself to bring it back into balance. And in a lot of cases, cannabis can help facilitate that kind of recentering back to a more balanced state.
That's remarkable. Remarkable. It- just and I love how people have this idea of the lazy stoner, of having the munchies, and THCV flips it on its head. It's interesting because the first story you told about the guy who felt full for the first time, he felt sated. That is sort of what happens, I believe, when people are using the GLP injections, that for the first time, whether it's with eating or another compulsive behavior, they feel like full for the first time. They feel sated. And the endocannabinoid system balances everything out. It makes sense that those would be related. And thank you also just for bringing up that nothing exists in a vacuum, right? Like if you're not getting good sleep, there's no way you're going to be motivated to be the best version of yourself the next day. If you're going to sleep full or you're going to sleep on a full stomach, things aren't going to be great. You're not going to get the most out of your sleep. So cannabis is a wonderful tool, and it was the tool that I needed, not on the weight loss side of things, but it was the tool I needed to slow down and recognize what the present moment was enough to be curious to get into meditation, to get into cognitive behavioral therapy, to get into a deeper level of my exercise. It's that intention, I think, that is really special. Okay, so every time I talk about THCV, people say, that's great, but where do I get it? Because if you go to 99 out of 100 cannabis stores, they are not only going to not have a THCV product, but they're not going to have any sort of balanced one-to-one ratio. So is this the transition to the farm cut co-brand? How on earth could someone try your Pink Boost Goddess if they felt like they needed this medicine and they lived in California?
Yeah. Well, I think before we dive into farm cut, I also want to just make a distinction. It's like when we say THCV and then we say Pink Boost Goddess, we really are talking about two different things.
Hmm.
And I see that this is a common misunderstanding that people make is they hear some of the stories of what Pink Boost Goddess is doing to support people, and then they look at Pink Boost Goddess and they're like, what's different about Pink Boost Goddess? Oh, it has THCV. Okay, THCV is what must be doing this. And then they go and they seek out a THCV molecule, a product with the THCV molecule. And I think it's important that everyone understand that THCV behaves differently as an isolate versus as a whole plant extract. It also behaves differently if it's a hemp derivative versus a natural whole cannabis plant expression. And then it also appears to behave differently when paired with different terpenes.
Hmm.
And that's some of the work that we're doing, right now as we're breeding. We've been breeding THCV for almost 10 years now, and we're really starting to dive in to what does THCV do with different terpene profiles. So that's kind of just like,
I appreciate the
I'm not going to give
distinction.
you any answers. I'm just going to, keep the mind open that like THCV and Pink Boost Goddess, they have something in similar, but they are different. Is THCV as an isolate is not guaranteed to give you the same effects that the
Of
strain
course.
Pink Boost Goddess would. Um, so if you're looking for Pink Boost Goddess, or if you're looking for different crosses of Pink Boost Goddess, you can find it in Farm Cut, which is a cooperative of 5 family farms. We're all based in Northern California. We're all multi-generational farms that share a story similar to what I described earlier with like the Back to the Land movement, parents moving up onto a piece of land, farming the land, growing food, growing cannabis, using organic practices. With legalization, these sorts of homesteads became threatened for, essentially going out of business, no longer being financially viable, because it's expensive to live off the land and to basically take a damaged piece of land and turn it into a productive garden space. And historically, a lot of the way that that was done was through funds from cannabis. So with legalization, we saw this kind of threat that was coming on, and we formed a cooperative of these 5 farms, and that is the Farm Cut Cooperative. So that's kind of what Farm Cut is now, and you can find Pink Boost Goddess available in Farm Cut. It's a minimally processed whole flower. You can also find it in pre-rolls that we do through the Farm Cut brand, and that's whole flower pre-rolls. We don't do any trim in the pre-rolls. And then we do also make a tincture of the Pink Boost Goddess that's under the Emerald Spirit Botanicals tincture line. And then what we've where we've taken Pink Boost Goddess over the last 4 years is we've created a number of different crosses that include Pink Boost Goddess. And this is, to kind of loop back to the note about different terpene profiles interact with THCV in slightly different ways. We're actively exploring that. So we're looking right now, just to kind of orientate the listeners, Pink Boost Goddess is THCV with myrcene, terpenoline, and ocimene as the top three terpenes. But what happens when you mix in linalool, which is, it's a common in lavender, is probably one of the plants that most people know. It's that smell, but it's also very relaxing. So when we take THCV, which is generally more uplifting, it's kind of like a coffee type of buzz, but we pair that with linalool, does that help to relax the body while keeping you still mentally alert? We believe it does, but you have to breed the genetics first to be able to, show that. So THCV can offer different types of experiences. So it's, the main reason I'm diving into this is I don't want people to put THCV into a box and think that this is what it does. It has a certain set of kind of common effects that we see across different terpene profiles, but we do see that different terpene profiles and then also different ratios of THC to THCV do change the effect. So it's just important to know that. And we can't say exactly how. There's research that's being done actively through anecdotal reporting that helps us better understand that. But I think Pink Boost Goddess really for us is sort of the tip of the iceberg into this exploration of THCV and seeing what it has to offer. If people want to try it, the flower, the pre-rolls, the tinctures, the easiest way to find the retailers that carry us is going to farmcutcannabis.com on our website and going to the retailer page and then, scrolling down to the region of California that you're based in. We have the whole list of all the shops. You can click on the shops, go to the menu and place your order. But you can also just reach out via email if you're, having trouble finding it, or if, your local shop is out of stock. You can just email me and I'll do my best to respond promptly. I think the reason we're not seeing it largely in dispensaries across California or across the US is because most people are still tracking THC as the defining factor of quality. And I think, it's totally understandable, because if you go into your average dispensary and you look at their menu, what do you see? You see the strain name, you see the THC percentage, and you see the price. So when a customer is only given these 3 bits of information, of course, you're looking for the highest THC for the lowest price, because if you're only given those 3 points, you either recognize the name of the strain, in which case you don't really care about the THC percentage. You like the strain, so what's the price? Or you don't know the name of the strain, so now all you have left is THC and price point. So I totally understand, but I think, this is a challenge for our retailers to better educate their staff, to better educate their customer base, and to give customers an opportunity to try something different. A lot of people are just hesitant to even put something like this on their menu because a lot of shops are, pinched financially. It's not exactly a thriving market. We're being overtaxed, so it's very hard to survive as a retailer, as a farmer, and so it's hard to take risks. And if somebody knows that they can buy this 30% THC and they know it's going to move, that's what they're going to lean on, because they need to pay the bills at the end of the month. So I think that's playing into it a lot. But as a farmer, as a breeder, as an educator, we're doing the best that we can, just one store at a time, one customer at a time, to educate and open people's hearts and minds to some of these other things that cannabis has to offer. I like to always remind people that the cannabis plant produces, some people are saying, over 100 different cannabinoids, and they all interact with our endocannabinoid system in a slightly different way. And THC is just one of those compounds. So, it gives us a rapid psychological shift, which is, it's very experiential. But, when we dive a little deeper, like, what are these other compounds doing? How are they interacting with our body? How is it creating the human experience? And is it something worth exploring? And we believe it is. We've seen, some incredible medical miracles around CBD, around THCV, around CBG and CBDV. And it really starts with cultivators breeding these genetics. We have to take the risk to spend an entire year to grow out the flower. Then we have to package the flower and get it through testing and get it onto the shelves. And then, customers have to be curious enough to try something different. So it's a slow process, but we are seeing enough positive feedback from people that we're almost 20 years into doing it. So it's not a one-off thing. This is something that's definitely making a major impact in people's lives. So we're just going to continue to do that. And the plants are also kind of just telling us this is what we need to be doing. So we listen to the plants because they're one of our guides.
I love it. Um, this is absolutely fascinating. Wh- Is there anything that a regular consumer can do to help this movement? When people go into stores and they ask for a balanced strain, usually the response is, we had it sitting on the shelf for a year. Someone bought 1/8. We never restocked it. And people are willing to make a medical pilgrimage, to find it. But what can the average consumer do if it kind of seems like it's not on the store shelves, but they want to get the word out. They want this to become part of the conversation. It does seem like it has a lot of traction. It's not just this niche thing anymore. People are asking for it, whether that's balanced strains, lower THC, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for a patient who's using lower THC with other minor cannabinoids and they're seeing success, I think, having the courage to tell your story is probably one of the most impactful things you can do right now. There's a pretty strong grip on cannabis research right now. It's very difficult to do. It's almost impossible to get funding for. And so we're really just relying on grassroots anecdotal evidence to create what I call the shared experience that lays the initial groundwork for more research down the line. But if you're finding a specific ratio with a specific terpene profile is having a positive benefit on you, like, take a moment to like write that down. Like, if some people, they have their little medical journals as they're looking for, their preferred dose or a special, they have a certain symptom that they're trying different herbs and different concoctions to benefit them. Like, just noting that down and seeing, first learning through yourself, like which ratios work best for your ailments or for your symptoms, which terpenes work best. And then once you find something, sharing that, because cannabis and human beings have existed alongside each other for thousands of years. Cannabis has been recognized as one of the most medicinal plants on the planet by civilizations all over the world. So when you're, seeking relief and support from this plant, you're tapping into a practice that has been happening for thousands of years. And by documenting that practice, you're becoming a part of history. By sharing that practice, you're educating people around you and giving them an opportunity to experience a potentially life-changing medical miracle with a plant. And I think, that's one of the greatest things we can do now is, sharing it with your community, sharing it if you go to a dispensary, and sharing that with the dispensary bud tenders, with the owner, with the inventory people, like just getting that story out, because the more we hear these stories and the more we see this happening, it becomes harder and harder to ignore. So I think that's probably one of the best ways for now, and letting your farmer know, because that feeds our soul. When I get an interview, or when I get an email from someone that tells me that, they've been suffering from this thing for months, and then they came across one of our strains and they tried it and it's giving them relief in a way that they hadn't found relief before, letting the farmer know really just feeds our soul, because this is what we're doing this for. Is we're trying to create a better world. We're trying to help humanity feel better about ourselves and restore balance. That's why we're cultivating this plant. So, those stories really just keep us charged up here on the farm. We don't get to talk to as many people. So just shoot us an email and let us know, and that makes a big difference.
I feel like this is like a hug your farmer type of situation. Um, I
That
love
too.
it. I love it. Well, maybe we can talk offline. Maybe there's some sort of maybe we can collect stories from our community. Maybe there's a way to share the stories. Word of mouth seems to be, at least among seniors, the way that for seniors that are kind of on the fence about trying cannabis, they hear it from a friend. They say,
Yeah.
"Wait, you look a lot better. What's going on?" And then they're like, "Oh, I take a half a gummy at night. Now I sleep." That's usually what it takes to get someone over the edge. So, Joseph, let's stay in touch. I would like to give you a hug. I have to admit, I'm a moron, which is not something I say ever, but I saw the Farm Cut Co. product at the Woods when I was there 2 weeks ago, and I said, "Hey,
Yeah.
this looks cool. Like this looks like these people know what they're doing." And I walked past it. And then I moved to Florida last week, and I think I might have missed my chance to try your Pink Boost Goddess, which is on me and
Um,
something I'll regret for the rest of my life. But I'll figure it out. I'll make a pilgrimage back just to try it. But
yeah.
thank you so much just for your work, for your time, for your family. It's obvious that, you do this because you love it. You see the difference it makes. There's no hesitation about that. So I think the more stories we hear about this and the more this conversation around minor cannabinoids and lower THC comes out, I do think there's going to be a market for it. Um, so thank you for everything you're doing, and I think I have to go back. So,
Hey,
hold
well, yeah,
on.
we're
Okay.
we're here in California. If you make it back, yeah, please reach out and we'll see what we can do. Whether I'm down, and I go down to LA once every 3 months, so I don't know
Okay.
if I would catch you at the Woods, but yeah, if you make
We'll
it
figure it
back,
out.
let us know.
Okay.
Yeah,
And everyone listening who's in, walking distance of the woods, just go grab Farm Cut and tell me what it's like so I can live through you because that was a big mistake on my part. But thank you so much, Joseph, and I hope you have a fabulous day.
yeah. Thank you, Catherine. Likewise.